So if you're tuning in, happy snow day. We're coming from Chicago, and it's got about 8 inches of snow with a little bit more on the way. And I figured what's better than spending your snow day inside with doing a little sketching. I know I've been kind of stir crazy. So today I was thinking about learning some basic proportions of the hands. Now, it's always been a struggle for artists to come up with ways to do this. And I've found that if we can limit the amount of information at the beginning and focus on the proportions first, we can have some basic building blocks of how to get started without getting overwhelmed in all the details. So if you look over here, I'm going to use my standard technical pencil to start laying some things out. I'll clear this off. But we're going to start off assuming that you kind of start your pieces by using some basic building blocks, such as just something like a circle, and a stick here. Now, if you're especially coming from the comic book world, a lot of times they start off with a stick figure, and this might be a basic hand when we're doing a stick figure. But let's take a look at how we can beef up, starting with the wrist. We're going to add some of the arm lines here. This doesn't look much like even a fist here, but I actually use this circle to start off defining my palm. Now, I want you to look directly at your hand. We're going to divide up this top, almost like pad in your palm right here. That's like part of the knuckles that folds forward. If this is a right side, or if this is your left hand, this is the pad on the side, and then you're going to see the difference between what we call another kind of egg shape over here that sticks off. That's going to form the pad or those muscles that define that first knuckle. So that circle in here at the end of this egg shape is my first knuckle of my thumb. So you might be wondering, since this would be something like a left hand, we're looking at it from the front, so you're seeing the palm. Let's define where that thumb is. A thumb, the bone is going to go through here, and for the thumb we'll draw in a second knuckle right here. Now, we won't add too much flesh to that, but we're going to actually plan out also where the fingers are going to be. So think about drawing the actual bone inside of the fingers and using a line to do that. So I'm going to kind of space it out, and since these are in the center, I'm going to start with my two edges like this, two vertical lines, okay, and then I'm going to evenly distribute these lines here. Okay, so notice how I put like a little bit of a space right there in between the edge of that circle, because we're actually going to add some, we're going to pipe it up or add some meat to these bones. But those are all pretty simple shapes. We have circles and lines and ovals, but it's easy enough to memorize. Now, the thing we have to think about, if you look at the thumb, I'm just going to add kind of a flat tip here and then use lines to kind of match up with this edge here. Now, I'm not too worried about everything right now, but just keep a general outline. So you can see how we're going to pipe these things up. Now, before we do that with the main fingers, I'm going to set some heights. And if you look closely at your hand, you'll notice that this line right here kind of represents where the palm ends and the finger begins. Now, each finger, if you separate it into the knuckle, the space in between each knuckle, you have 3 spaces. So for example, on the first finger, there should be a fold here, here, and then this would be the end of the finger. What I like to do is go to the pinky, and the pinky is obviously shorter, but also starts a little lower. So you might see that that space is here, here, and here. So we know the pinky is the shortest, but which finger is usually the longest? It's generally the middle finger, right? So it's going to be sometimes almost half a knuckle taller. And so we just generally space out those knuckles. The ring finger is probably similar height to the pointer finger. Okay, but what you'll notice is that these lines right here, if I could just simplify a curved line between all 3. Oh, actually I messed that one up. It goes down to here. And then here's the height of my fingers. That's actually going to tell me the length of each finger. Now, it might seem like it's a little convoluted here, but I'm going to go from the top up here and add just some straight lines to beef up these fingers. And you'll see this will give you some general proportions. All right, not worried too much about even the roundness of my fingers. But you'll notice that by boxing in some of these things, we already have a pretty approximate proportion for the hand. Now, I'm using Procreate right now, so this allows me to kind of create another layer. We'll save that for a second. I'm going to also clean up some of those things. So I'll go into my eraser. Let's test that out. Okay. So those lines that I drew, I can kind of clean them up. And you'll notice pretty quickly that we've arrived at a pretty reasonable drawing of a hand. And the lines that we drew to divide the fingers into their knuckles kind of serve as those folds between the finger. Now what you'll notice if you look close enough at a hand or compare it to somebody else's is that everyone has a unique proportion. So for example, let's take a look at this new layer. And I'm going to change my color so we can take a look at some of these features. All right. So for example, you might have, let's say this is the top length for this finger. Compare, then we have the next longest, a little bit shorter here. Right? And then all the way down here. Those things, all three of those relationships might change on somebody else's hand. The other thing is your thumb. Look at things like this gap in between here, and then also lines you could use to fold in. Another thing is the distance of this knuckle and this knuckle. Okay, those things can affect how it looks. And depending on the person's hand or the pose of the hand, we have different ways we can pose that. So let's try, we'll create two new layers, or at least one. We'll turn these off. Let's think about some other common hand poses. So let's start off with that ball and stick again. I'm going to switch my color back to black. And we'll zoom out. So let's try a fist. Okay, now we're going to do a fist in two ways. Let me have one over here. Okay. One is going to be like similar pose, looking at the wrist and how we'll be seeing the fingers curl in. And then we'll also look at one that's punching at us. Okay, we'll come back to that in a second. So let's start off here. Now we're going to add the wrist. Okay, I have this as my palm. Pretty long arm here, so who knows how long that'll be. But before we get too into it, I want you to take your left hand, if you're following along with me, or the opposite, make a fist, and first we're going to take a look at the slant over here. We're going to create a little bit of an angle like that, okay? Because at the peak of this, we're going to also think about a straight line here, okay? And it's going to come in just like we had some of those shapes. We still have the common shapes in the palm, okay? Those divisions are very common. But let's think about what happened to the knuckles, okay? So in this shape right here is hiding this knuckle for the thumb. But you're also going to see a second knuckle here, and the thumb is going to bend in, okay? Now the other part is we had those knuckles before. If this is the true palm, we actually might need to bring this out a little bit more. We have an angle here. The reason this is sort of angled is because this finger is generally shorter. Okay, we're going to draw a couple divisions here, turning inward. Now those are kind of loose, but we're going to bring them up a little bit more. Looks like my Apple Pencil is dying, so we might have to come back to this. Too bad. Oh, bummer. Yeah, I'll have to do this again, but thanks for tuning in. I guess this is what you learn when you go live for the first time. So those of you who stuck around, Thanks for joining me, but let's take a look at this other one. You guys can practice this again. This will help you out with a lot of those general hand poses. Start off simple, and you shouldn't have a problem. In no time, you'll be drawing hands like a master. Thanks for joining in. Thanks.